This mom is charged in a case that is leaving us at a loss for words, and you may be at a loss for words as well. Her former landlord discovered inside the home that he evicted her from not just one dead infant, but reportedly a total of 3 dead infants. This video per WTAE. We have so many questions about how this could happen and what this mom is telling investigators as she is now accused of murder. We're on the case, presented by Law & Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. How anyone could be accused of the crime that a woman outside of Pittsburgh is accused of is beyond us. It's impossible to comprehend, but it becomes even more shocking when you think about the fact that this woman was a mother. And let's break down what we know at this point in this incredibly disturbing story. First off, the suspect, Jessica Mauthe. She's 38 years old. Here's a picture of her with her husband, Jacob Mauthe. Now, it appears the two of them got married around 2017. This is per pictures on Facebook. Also on social media, we see that Jessica appears to be the mom of 2 boys. Now, according to Pennsylvania prison records, Jacob Mauthe is currently incarcerated. It appears he started serving a sentence in January of this year. And I'll get into more about what I found related to his criminal record in just a moment, how it could potentially factor into the crime that his wife is now accused of committing. According to WTAE, after Jacob was incarcerated, Jessica really became a single mom. She was raising these 2 boys. Jessica moved into this house in Cadogan Township, Pennsylvania, tiny town of less than 400 people, 37 miles northeast of Pittsburgh. She reportedly worked at a nearby Italian restaurant 50 hours a week, but still couldn't make ends meet. Her landlord gave this video to WTAE of Mauthe being evicted on August 14th. She left behind a pigsty of clothes, abandoned cats, and furniture. Then, the landlord found something that no one could be prepared for. He says he also found a baby, deceased, wrapped in a plastic bag in a closet. The landlord then called police. Investigators searched this home, and in the attic, police say they found 2 more deceased infants hidden in totes in the attic of that home. Now, we've requested court records related to what Mauthe told investigators to see them for ourselves, but per local media, she did admit that she gave birth to all 3 of the babies found dead inside that home. She also admitted to wrapping them in plastic and hiding their bodies. KDKA-TV is reporting some details that are very difficult to say to you, but I do think they're important when talking about this story. But I'm just warning you to brace yourself here, because Mauthe allegedly told authorities that she gave birth to one of the babies about a year ago when she was on a toilet. She reportedly said she could hear that baby making noises, so she wrapped the child in a blanket until the baby stopped making noises. She then put that child in a closet. It appears this is the child that the landlord came upon when he was cleaning the home. Pennsylvania State Police have not said much about this case other than that Mauthe is charged with criminal homicide and abuse of a corpse. The release that they sent out to the media, they say they're working with local police and the local coroner in this investigation. So we could see more charges in this case once an autopsy is complete. The local district attorney has yet to comment on the case. Now, as far as Mauthe's husband, Jacob, here's what we know about his criminal record. He's currently serving time in a Western Pennsylvania state prison. His record shows that his sentence started in January of this year. And I found this article from 2023 mentioning that Jacob Mauthe in the local newspaper, the Lee-Tai. It said that Mauthe was arrested in 2023 on 5 charges, including a 3rd-degree felony of endangering the welfare of children. He also was facing 1st-degree misdemeanor endangering the welfare of children, misdemeanor DUI, general impairment, damage to unattended vehicle or property, and driving while license is suspended, which was his 2nd offense for that, according to the newspaper. It all stems from June 2023, where police in South Buffalo Township, Pennsylvania, arrested Jacob after he allegedly drove drunk with 2 young kids in the car, who we believe to be the 2 young boys I showed you at the top of the story, and he allegedly backed into a garage at a local post office. The article says that he was in his pajamas, he could barely stand because he was allegedly drunk. Mauthe, the newspaper said, drove his wife to work and was taking his 2 kids to a t-ball game. Now, it's unclear if that case is the one that Jacob is behind bars for. He was arrested and he faced those felony charges. Neighbors of Jessica Mauthe told KDKA after those 3 infants were found dead inside her home that her 2 older children, the boys that are 6 and 8 years old, would be watched by numerous neighbors in this neighborhood, that there just wasn't a lot of structure. One neighbor said he had no idea that Mauthe was pregnant. Now, one other neighbor said the support system for Mauthe's boys from their mom barely existed. Before I get back to this episode of On the Case, we need to take a moment and talk about an important sponsor. They do keep us busy here at Law&Crime, so I need to fuel up to keep my energy up throughout the day. But there are a lot of supplements and bars that are meant for on-the-go snacking that can be a mess with misleading labels and really complicated ingredients. That's why I really love our new sponsor, Equip, and what they're doing, because they have clean nutrition in mind, and they're all about food first. Transparent sourcing, third-party testing, and no toxins or fillers sneaking in. Their Prime Bar isn't just another protein bar. It is a grass-fed beef superfood bar. It tastes like dessert, so instead of junky syrups and seed oils, Equip is built with real, functional ingredients like the 20 grams of pasture-raised protein, and then you also have dates and honey that help give it a real sweet taste. I actually keep a box on hand when I desperately need that sweet fix, and you can too at equipfoods.com/onthecase. You guys are going to love how clean and delicious these bars are. They will be a household staple for you and your family. Equip is giving my audience a great offer. You want to hit the link right here or go directly to equipfoods.com/onthecase. You can use my promo code ONTHECASE to get 20% off your first order or 35% off your first subscription. We want to thank Equip for making the best bar on the market and partnering with me. Now, it's unclear what the motive would be for this alleged crime. Again, there's just so many questions at this point. We just have the disturbing details, and we're working to learn more information. More tests are being done, again, meaning that more charges could be coming. Joining us now to talk more about this from Western Pennsylvania is former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney Matt Mangino. It's always great to have you on Law&Crime. I know the case that we're talking about here is very difficult, a lot of tough details related to what was found inside this home. 4 prosecutors in this case. They have their suspect behind bars. She's reportedly confessed to at least what seems like an alleged murder that happened inside her home of one child that she gave birth to, she said, while she was on the toilet about a year ago. What more do you need to prosecute this case?
Well, you're gonna have an autopsy, and you're gonna be able to tell from the autopsy, whether the child was the infant was born alive. According to her statements, the child was alive, was moving and making some noises, and then she took the child from the toilet and wrapped the child in a towel until the infant stopped moving. So, I'd be anxious to see if there's any water in the infant's lungs, from being in the toilet or anything else that would be indicative of actually being born alive, as she has said in her statement. And that's significant because that changes this from abuse of a corpse or some sort of miscarriage to homicide. And it doesn't matter how long this infant lived. The fact that the infant was born alive and she did nothing or actually precipitated the child's death, is homicide.
And I know because there was 2 other infants that were found in this home dead in the attic. Feels from just some of the descriptions that we're getting, somewhat similar situation as far as being a body found in a tote. What is the process? Because it appears she's only charged with 1 count of murder as we speak, and that was for the baby related to what she had admitted to. How does it go, the next steps in the process, figuring out what happened to these 2 other babies and what charges she could face for that?
Well, first of all, the issue would be, the extent of decomposition with regard to the other 2 infant bodies that they found, and whether they would be able to, through an autopsy of their bodies, would they be able to determine a cause, manner of death. And that might limit their ability. Again, it would depend on what statements she's made with regard to the other two infant bodies that were found in totes, I guess, in the attic of this house that she rented. But Chris, unfortunately, this is not as unusual as it might sound. It's horrific. It's horrifying to hear that you find 3 infant bodies in a home. But neonaticide is a mother killing her child within 24 hours of being born. Often we see that in situations where people are trying to conceal their pregnancy, young people who've concealed their pregnancy and don't want to deal with the issues that come with being a mother and being disclosed to their families and others. But that doesn't seem to be the case here.
And that's a good point, because I know recently we've been covering the case of a woman named Laken Snelling, who's 21 years old. She is a student at the university, or was a student at the University of Kentucky, and they find a body in her off-campus apartment of a infant, and she has allegedly confessed to giving birth to that infant. So it's a case that has some similarities to what we're dealing with here, but also, she was already a mom, the mom here in Western PA, and she has these 2 young boys. Her husband is incarcerated. And so there's just questions of how this could happen, knowing that I don't believe she lived in the home for that long a period of time. And just in your experience from the prosecutorial side of it, I mean, in some of these cases, how do people slip through the cracks where there was a neighbor quoted saying that he had no idea that she was pregnant in the first place, to then, I don't know if it was a twin situation or a triplet situation, but just to conceal that many births just seems very out of the ordinary.
Well, right, Chris. And although, as I mentioned a moment ago, we see these particularly with young teenaged mothers who tried to conceal their pregnancy and then try to conceal the birth. This is a 39-year-old woman who has 2 children, and apparently she's giving birth to at least 3 other infants that are dead, and I can see, and I don't know the details of this, but if her husband's incarcerated and she's pregnant, obviously she's going to want to keep that from her husband who's incarcerated. So you see some sort of motive there because you don't want to be revealed in those circumstances. But there's also the issue of isolation. She has 2 children. Her husband is in prison. She has nobody to turn to necessarily with regard to helping her with this pregnancy, and she sees this as an alternative to bringing another child into her family. I mean, this is all speculation, but what we do know is that this infant, according to her, was born alive and is now dead, and she's responsible based on her own statements.
And the autopsies, and I know those are being done right now, will really be a moment that'll show where this case will go forward. She has in many ways confessed to murder, and if what she's saying is true, that's exactly what she said, because the baby was making sounds. Then she wrapped the baby in a towel until the baby stopped making sounds, and that is murder. If you're a defense attorney who gets her as a client, how do you go about putting up the best defense that you can for a woman that is accused of not just serious crimes, but it seems like there's going to be a lot of strong evidence against her?
Well, yes. I mean, she's charged with a general charge of homicide in Pennsylvania, which really leaves open all the possibilities, from first-degree murder, down to, involuntary or voluntary manslaughter. So that issue is really wide open right now, just based on this general charge of homicide. I mean, I'm going to look at her mental health. If I were defending her, I'd especially want to have some evaluations done to determine, what's the state of her mental health. Was she getting support in the community? Was she getting mental health medication if she needed it? Was she isolated by this whole circumstance with having two children and working and having her husband in jail and really, putting her in a position where she thought that her situation was hopeless and that she had no other alternative. That doesn't necessarily negate her responsibility, but it may mitigate her responsibility from, someone who's ultimately facing first-degree murder as opposed to third-degree or even a manslaughter charge. So I would really focus on her health, her mental, and any mental illness and how this whole scenario has impacted her life.
I read there was a neighbor that said that she had worked 50 hours a week at a local Italian restaurant that was down the street. And that's a lot of, far more than the 40 hours a week that, typically people do with a 9 to 5. So I could see the argument the defense would make is like, this was a woman who was in way over her head. But even so, if you have 3 bodies of infants in your home and then the pictures from inside the house just look like some very difficult conditions as well, what would be the difference if, say, that argument has an impact, kind of pulls at the heartstrings of a jury, compared to that first-degree murder, the worst it could possibly be, life in prison? What could be the best possible outcome for her?
Well, the best possible outcome would be some, lesser offense, as I said, a third-degree murder, which is, killing with malice in Pennsylvania. Manslaughter is, careless disregard for the well-being of another person. So, those would be options here. I think what complicates it a bit for her is this has happened at least 3 times. And so, you can get into a panicked emotional state because you're in this circumstance that can be really detrimental to you. Your husband finds out, he's in jail. Now you have 3 children to care for. You're still working 50 hours a week. But, you can't have that same sort of panic over a series of years. This has almost become a modus operandi for her. If you look at it closely, hey, you get pregnant, you don't get any care, you deliver the child at home, you put the child in a bag, and that's the end of your works. That's going to make her mental health issue a little more difficult.
And you look at the conditions inside the house. Apparently there were several abandoned cats, which was the landlord. It seems like his main concern when he came to change the locks, and he sees his property, furniture left behind. She just ditched the place, it appears. And then he ends up smelling something, and it's tough to talk about. And then he finds this bag, and it ends up being something that no one would be prepared to see. How could the conditions with which she left the home, knowing that she had a 6 and 8-year-old also living in those conditions in the home, impact how this trial, would any of that impact how a potential murder trial will play out for her related to the infants?
Well, I don't know that it necessarily has a direct connection to her conduct, but it also, at a minimum, is going to come into the evidence as prosecutors, sort of lay the groundwork to their case, and they're going to see that this may be just the conduct of a person who just really doesn't care about the people that are around her, doesn't care about herself, doesn't care about her own children that were born, and is callous and jaded and unhappy enough to just intentionally terminate these lives after these children are born. I'd be anxious to see how prosecutors would ultimately use that whole environment as a way of portraying the defendant in this case.
We often talk about in some very difficult stories about whether someone has, what state of mind they were in when they allegedly committed these crimes. When it comes to an insanity plea, let's just say a defense attorney wants to go in that direction with her in Pennsylvania, what would they have to prove for that to be effective?
Well, in Pennsylvania, as in most states, you have to be in a situation where you cannot separate the difference between right and wrong. Okay, so essentially, an insanity defense, you come and say, hey, the police come, you shot your neighbor. Oh yeah, I did shoot my neighbor. Well, why'd you shoot your neighbor? Well, my neighbor is an alien from outer space and is trying to take over the world. They don't deny that they aimed a gun and pulled the trigger, but they just don't realize and can't appreciate the fact that this person is not an alien from outer space, and what they did was not to protect the world or the United States of America. So that becomes very difficult. So portraying someone as though they don't understand the difference between right and wrong is very difficult. So let me give you an example that we could apply to this case. So let's say she's suffering under this mental health problem so severe that she gives birth to the child and just leaves the child in the toilet, just leaves the child on the floor. No. She put the child in a tote bag and put the tote bags in the attic. She understands that what she did was wrong, or she wouldn't have tried to conceal the fact that she had these children, and she wouldn't have put them in a bag, in a tote bag, and put them in the attic, or put the other child that was most recently found in a bag and put it in the closet. That's not the way someone who's suffering under a severe mental defect acts after they've committed some sort of crime.
And just lastly, Matt, I know every state is a little bit different sometimes when it comes to the next steps in all of this. And right now she's being held behind bars. She's apparently had an interview with law enforcement, and they are waiting on autopsies. What would you anticipate comes next in terms of hearings and potentially what the timeline would look like to get to a trial?
Well, the next step would be what's called a preliminary arraignment, where they would schedule a bond hearing. Whether or not that's happened, I don't believe that it has. I believe she was arrested yesterday. But ultimately, the next step in the process after that preliminary arraignment would be a preliminary hearing, in which she would go in front of a magistrate judge, and the prosecution would present a probable cause hearing. There's enough information here for this case to move forward to the Court of Common Pleas, as they're called in Pennsylvania, and ultimately a trial.
And we'll see how it all plays out. Very sad story, no doubt about it there, coming out of Western PA. Criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor Matt Mangino, joining us from Western PA. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Chris.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.